Hi guys, for today, we are having inflation. Inflation. What is inflation? Inflation is the increase in the general level of prices. Or more technically, it is the rate at which the average price level of a basket of selected goods and services in an economy increases over some period of time. What does it mean when we talk about the general price levels in the economy? Well, there should be representation. We should create a basket of goods and services that would act as a proxy for all other goods and services in the economy. Representations of prices may be the consumer price index. This is the weighted average price index of consumption goods. Represents the typical household expenditure. We also have producer price index, the weighted average price index of resources for production, represents the typical business expenditures. We also have the GDP deflator, the weighted average price index of all goods and services accounted for in the GDP. This represents the overall expenditures in the economy. Of the three possible indices, the most popular is the CPI, Consumer Price Index. Hence, we will be focusing with the use of CPI. To arrive at the CPI of T, where T is the current time period, we can calculate it using this formula. CPI sub T is equal to the cost of market basket in year T divided by the cost of market basket in the base year multiplied by 100. After calculating the CPI, we can now proceed to calculating the inflation rate based on the composition of the CPI. Consumer inflation rate is equal to CPI of T minus CPI of T minus 1 divided by CPI of T minus 1 times 100, where T is equal to the current time period, T minus 1 is the last time period. Let us refer to the following sample case for an illustration. The following table shows the prices of goods and services included in the CPI basket. We have the products 10 instant noodles, 20 trips of jeepney worth of fare, 1 t-shirt. Note that this is an oversimplified example. If we're going to include all goods and services in the economy that would be part of the CPI, we're going to need a larger screen. We have the total cost of these items for the year 2019, 2018, and 2012. For this sample case, the base year for the CPI calculation is 2012. That is, it is our reference year, a reference period which is our 100%. We would start with the calculation of the CPI for this year. How to calculate the CPI each year? Let us refer to the total cost of the basket for each year in those 3 years given. The basket's market value for 2019 is 490. 2018, 475. 2012, 390. We are going to divide all of this by the base year's total market value. Again, that is 2012. Divide by 390 for each year. You would have 1.256 for 2019, 1.218 for 2018, and 1 for 2012, considering that 2012 is our base year. After that, multiply the figures by 100. You have the following CPIs: 125.6 for 2019, 121.8 for 2018, and 100 for 2012. After arriving at the CPI, we are now going to calculate the consumer inflation rate. How to calculate the consumer inflation rate for 2019? To calculate the consumer inflation rate for 2019, we are going to do the following. CPI of 2019 minus CPI of 2018 divided by CPI of 2018 times 100. We have 125.6 minus 121.8 divided by 121.8 times 100. We will have a consumer inflation rate of 3.1%. What does this mean? The general level of prices has risen by 3.1% from 2018 to 2019. Since our inflation rate is based on the CPI, note that all of the goods and services included there pertain to the average household. This is the relevant figure that would be valid when we evaluate the impact of inflation on the typical household. Now, what causes inflation? Inflation can be demand pull or cost push. Demand pull inflation is a rise in the general level of prices as a result of excessive aggregate demand. This happens when there's too much money chasing too few goods. Remember, in our production possibilities curve, there's only too much that the economy can produce in a typical time frame. Now, if the level of income that translates to more money in the economy would exceed the production capacity of the economy, there would be too much money chasing too few goods. Because there's too few goods, there is a bidding tendency as a result of too much money in the economy. As a result, we would see the prices go up. This is common to notice in situations of prosperity. When the economy is in a boom or in a prosperous state, everybody has the money to buy things, but sometimes the production of the things cannot follow. As a result, it simply translates into inflation. As a result, the value of the money goes down. For demand pull inflation, it does not correct itself. As long as things are going well for the people and there's less production, then the inflation would continue. A least desirable kind of inflation is the cost push inflation. This is the increase in prices as a result of the increase in the cost of inputs. A classic example of cost push inflation happened 3 decades ago. What happened basically is a lot of oil producing countries group themselves as an oligopoly. They control the supply of oil. As a result, since they are the ones to set the prices of oil, all other countries in the world economy are experiencing inflation, considering that oil is a necessary input for production. More recent examples of inflation are also cost push. If there is an increase in excise taxes because of a change in tax laws, it is also possible to notice that prices are going up. This too is cost push inflation. Now, unlike demand pull inflation, cost push inflation can correct itself. As a result of cost push inflation, it can result to a recession or maybe a depression. At that point, the cost push inflation will no longer continue. Effects of inflation. Inflation can distort the information delivered by prices. We know that we use the price as a measure of the value of an item. But if the prices are going up continuously, we would no longer have a feel of what the value of a product or service would be, considering that the prices are continuously increasing. Another effect of the inflation is it harms lenders and it benefits borrowers. Imagine a loan agreement between borrower and lender before inflation. The money is valuable. A peso is worth a lot. But after inflation and at the time of payment, the borrower would pay the same amount of money plus interest, but such amount is no longer as valuable as it was at the time of borrowing, benefiting the borrower, harming the lender. There is also a difference between headline inflation and core inflation. Headline inflation incorporates all of the CPI components. However, if we are going to rely on headline inflation, it might not be representative of the long-term trend of the inflation rate, considering that there are components in the CPI that fluctuate in prices temporarily, such as a result of a disaster, like a flood affecting agricultural produce, or temporary reduction in the supply of oil in the world market. As a result, we also have the core inflation. It is the calculation that excludes volatile components of the CPI, especially agricultural food and fuel items. So headline inflation is something that we can use to talk about how prices are rising in the short term. But if we're going to set a long-term trend, we are going to rely on the core inflation. Another important thing that we should be knowledgeable of is that inflation has a relationship with unemployment. We call this the Phillips curve. According to the Phillips curve, there's an inverse relationship between inflation rate and unemployment rate. That is, high inflation rate is associated with low unemployment rate. High unemployment rate is associated with low inflation rate. Why does this happen? Well, this is especially true for demand pull inflation. If people are employed, they have the buying power, considering they have income as a result of employment, to purchase goods and services. As a result, it can lead to inflation. So, low unemployment rate, high inflation. On the other end, if there is a high unemployment rate, the tendency is that the people will have less buying power, and as a result, there would be no pressure to raise prices on the part of the producers. During the 1970s, however, the validity of the Phillips curve has been put into question. In the 1970s, there happens to be a stagflation, a combination of stagnation and inflation, where there's high unemployment as well as high inflation. Accordingly, the Phillips curve has shifted to the right, putting into question, again, this is putting into question the long-term applicability of the Phillips curve. This would conclude our discussion on inflation rate. Like, share, and subscribe.